QPS receives funding from three primary sources: local funding, state funding, and federal funding. As you can see in the chart, the majority of our funding, about 64%, comes from local sources, primarily property taxes. State funding makes up roughly a quarter of our revenue, and federal funding accounts for a smaller but important portion. Let's begin with local funding, which is the largest source of revenue for Quincy Public Schools. Most of this funding comes from property taxes, but local revenue also includes corporate personal property replacement taxes, breakfast and lunch sales, admissions from school events, donations, etc. Because Illinois relies heavily on property taxes to fund schools, a district's local funding is closely tied to the wealth of its community. That creates challenges and disparities across districts. You'll also see CPPRT listed here. That is a state-collected tax on businesses that is redistributed to local taxing districts, including schools. Local funding is the backbone of our budget. The second major funding source is state funding. Illinois moved from the old general state aid formula, which was in place for nearly 2 decades, to the current evidence-based funding, or EBF, formula. This model uses 34 different factors to determine what it should cost to provide an adequate education and compares that to a district's ability to raise money locally. The goal of this new formula is to direct more state resources to districts furthest from their adequacy target. Based on the Illinois State Board of Education's own calculation, Quincy Public Schools would need to receive $21.6 million additional per year to be considered adequately funded. While the formula has improved equity, the adequacy gap remains significant. State funding also includes reimbursements for transportation and special education tuition. Our third funding source is federal funding. Unlike local and state dollars, federal funds are generally very targeted and restricted. They must be used for specific purposes, such as supporting low-income students through title programs, special education through IDEA, early childhood education, and school nutrition programs. These dollars are important, but they are designed to supplement, not replace, core operating funding. When people ask where school dollars go, the biggest answer is simple: people. Salaries and benefits account for about 68% of our budget. Public education is labor-intensive. That includes teachers, support staff, administrators, specialists, and many others who support students every day. Beyond staffing, funds support purchase services, supplies, capital improvements, debt obligations, and specialized tuition placements. Every category represented here plays a role in supporting students and operating our schools. Another common question is where property tax dollars go. For residents in Quincy, the school district receives the largest share, about 59% of the total property tax bill. It is important to note the district only controls its own levy. Each taxing body sets its levy separately, and your total bill reflects all taxing bodies combined. This slide breaks down the school district's portion of the tax levy. You can see how property taxes are distributed among various legally separate funds, including education, operations and maintenance, transportation, debt service, tort, and others. Each fund serves a different purpose, and each has restrictions on how dollars may be spent. This is important because school finance isn't one big pot of money. There are separate buckets with separate rules. This graphic helps visualize those buckets. Think of each fund almost like its own checking account. Each has its own purpose, and expenditures can only be made for allowable uses within that fund. That structure is a key part of school finance and helps explain why dollars in one bucket cannot simply be moved wherever needed. Over the next few slides, we'll briefly explain each of these funds. The Education Fund is the district's largest operating fund and represents roughly 70% of our total budget. This supports classroom instruction, salaries and benefits, student support programs, instructional materials, technology, professional development, extracurricular activities, and more. It is also important to note that funding reductions made in 2003 in areas like athletics and music remain today, which is why Boosters, the Friends of the Performing Arts, and the Quincy Public Schools Foundation are heavily relied on to help fill gaps. Operations and maintenance supports the upkeep of our facilities. This includes custodial staff, routine repairs, utilities, building systems, and maintenance supplies. Increasing utility costs have put a strain on the maintenance budget. This fund helps ensure our schools remain safe, functional, and ready for learning. The Transportation Fund supports getting students to and from school safely. It covers drivers and support staff, fuel, maintenance, leased buses, supervision, and safety-related expenses. Transportation represents about 5% of our budget, but it is critical for daily operations. The working cash fund can best be thought of as a savings account. Its purpose is to provide short-term cash flow support when needed through interfund loans. This fund provides stability and flexibility when timing differences arise in revenues and expenditures. The debt service fund supports repayment of bonds and related interest. These dollars are restricted to debt obligations and cannot be redirected for operating expenses. This fund accounts for about 9% of our budget. This fund supports employer obligations for retirement and Social Security costs, including Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund contributions for support staff and employer FICA and Medicare payments. These are mandatory costs and an important part of maintaining our workforce. The tort fund supports insurance premiums, legal obligations, safety and security expenses, and related protections. This includes things like liability coverage, workers' compensation, unemployment, and school security costs. These are necessary expenditures that help manage risk and keep schools safe. This fund is dedicated to health and safety related facility needs. It supports fire alarms, sprinkler systems, inspections, and approved life safety projects. These dollars are highly restricted and focused solely on facility requirements that protect students and staff. Recent examples of life safety projects include critical investments to protect our facilities and maintain safe learning environments, such as replacing leaking roofs, upgrading aging heating and air conditioning equipment, and replacing the turf and track at Flynn Stadium. Now let's look at the Education Fund tax rate. Quincy's $84 Education Fund tax rate was established in 1988, and voter approval through referendum is the only way to exceed that legal maximum. Why does that matter? Because the Education Fund is what supports many of the people, programs, and services most closely connected to students, and that leads us to some important comparisons. When comparing Quincy to neighboring districts, you can see our Education Fund tax rate is at or below peers. It is not even a fair comparison. Quincy Public Schools provides extensive programming and opportunities for students, from graduation pathways and interventions to advanced coursework, athletics, music, and fine arts, that these other districts do not. This helps illustrate how Quincy Public Schools is doing so much more with comparatively fewer local resources. When we expand the comparison to LUTA districts, which are similar in size, the gap becomes even more noticeable. LUTA stands for Large Unit District Association. This association is comprised of 55 Illinois districts that have a student enrollment of more than 3,500. Quincy's Education Fund tax rate is significantly below comparable large unit districts. Quincy is the only LUTA school district that has not increased its Education Fund rate from $1.84 that was established in 1988. These next series of graphs focus specifically on our operating funds, which include the Education Fund, operations and maintenance, transportation, and working cash. These are the funds that support the day-to-day operations of our school district. As you look at the graphs, the blue bar represents revenues, the yellow bar represents expenses, and the red line represents the operating funds balance, or the amount of cash in the bank. To understand where we are today, it's important to understand where we started. In July of 2017, the beginning balance across our operating funds was just $265,000. For perspective, our monthly payroll obligation is approximately $4 million. This resulted in the state assigning the district its lowest financial profile designation, Financial Watch, indicating the highest level of financial risk and even the potential for state intervention. In January 2017, the district took difficult but necessary steps to stabilize finances, implementing $1.8 million in budget cuts. Even as we worked to regain stability, additional financial pressures emerged, many outside the district's control. In February 2019, the state enacted the $15 minimum wage law, creating an estimated $1.5 million impact on our budget once fully implemented. Then in August 2019, a new $40,000 minimum teacher salary law added another $250,000 in annual costs. These are examples of unfunded mandates, requirements districts must meet without additional dedicated funding to support them. The largest expense increase has been health insurance. Since 2015 to 16, our health insurance costs have nearly doubled, increasing from approximately $6.5 million annually to about $12.9 million today. That kind of growth puts significant pressure on operating funds and reduces dollars available for classrooms, staffing, and student supports. These projections were presented to our Finance Committee and Board in December 2019. Those projections, along with other factors, led to the attempt to pass an education fund referendum in March 2020. That referendum would have generated roughly $5.3 million annually, but it was unsuccessful. COVID relief funds helped to delay the impending cuts. During the pandemic, the district made a strategic decision. Rather than using one-time federal relief dollars to create ongoing expenses, those dollars were used to cover costs we were already paying and to strengthen reserves. That strategy bought time and helped avoid immediate cuts that many districts are now facing. It was a disciplined approach designed to stabilize the district while longer-term solutions are considered. When you look at this chart, we are essentially back where we were in 2020, but this time with some cushion. While the slope may appear less steep, this projection does not include roughly 60 currently open positions. Even so, the district is projecting losses of more than $20 million over 5 years. That is not a gap that can be solved through temporary fixes. It will take coordinated, community-wide solutions. COVID relief helped buy time, but it did not eliminate the underlying structural challenge. That is why the board is acting proactively now. It is important to recognize that this district has worked hard to be a responsible steward of taxpayer dollars. For years, we have stretched resources and operated lean, but over time, that approach has consequences. We are seeing those impacts in compensation challenges and delayed facility needs. Securing our future means making smart investments today so we can attract and retain high-quality staff, maintain and improve facilities, and ensure Quincy Public Schools remain strong, competitive, and prepared for the future.